Okay, we should be good. Are we live? Yes, we're live. Okay, I want to say thank you to Gordon for helping me get this stuff finally squared away. I feel a lot more confident. I was trying to do way too much, um, more than what Facebook could handle at the time. So I'm glad that I was able to get that taken care of. So I'm going to start over for the third time. Um, these are readings that I've done today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, put that right there. Excuse me. Huh. So what I wanted to discuss, all right, are the scriptures laid out here. So in Deuteronomy, I'm not going to go through all this because this will be my third time reading this text. But Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 22, really verses 9. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you any that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. Key word there, you see that the word necromancer is there, not the word medium. Okay? For all that do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord that God doth drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God. For these nations which thou shalt possess hearken unto observers of times and unto diviners, but as for thee, the Lord thy God hath not suffered thee so. The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee. And I want you to notice something very, very key about that, in that the word prophet here is capitalized. That is a key note. All right, when you look at hermeneutics and exegetical study of the scriptures, these are very small but very important distinctions here. So this word prophet is been capitalized, which indicates a proper noun. Okay. I will raise up a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken, according to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Oreb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire any more. And the Lord said unto me, they have well spoken that which they have spoken. I will raise up again, you see the word prophet, okay, is capitalized, from among their brethren, like unto thee. And I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. Verse 20, but the prophet. Now, interesting here, this word prophet, you see, is not capitalized. Okay, but the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in the name of other gods, even that prophet shall die. And if thou say in thine heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord hath not spoken? Verse 22, when a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken, but the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously, thou shalt not be afraid of him. So I'm going to wrap that up very condense it. So these practices are detestable among other nations. The only way and the only place that these practices have among the elect of God were those who were specifically trained in those activities, in those skill sets. All right, the people who were trained in those things were called prophets. They were called prophets. So as we know, these tools can be very dangerous. They can be very deceptive. They can be very manipulative, and on and on and on and on. all right, in the hands and in the use of people who are untrained and unskilled. Okay, it's just like a firearm. Okay, a firearm can be used to create a massacre, right? But a firearm can also be used in the hands of a law enforcement officer to rightfully execute the extent of the law. So it's about skill, all right? It's about training. Have these people been authorized, okay, by God to perform these activities, all right? And so because these activities were done by the other nations, thank you, that Jehovah had no dealing with, they were unauthorized among his people unless you had gone through the proper ranks and files and were ordained and consecrated a prophet. Now I can prove this to you. Number one, because here we're reading the book of Deuteronomy, this is speaking to Moses. Speaking to Moses. Moses was one of those people who had went through the mystery schools and had picked up these sciences. These arcane sciences right from the depths of Egypt. I can prove that to you in the book of Acts. We can go there now. The book of Acts chapter 7. And beginning at 22. All right. And it says, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. All right. So here we see that he was learning all the deep wisdom of Egypt, whether that was your more modern sciences like astronomy, chemistry, physics, which we know that Egypt was a educational and an intellectual center of its day, but also there were arcane sciences. Not only was he to learn chemistry and physics and astronomy, but also astrology, magic, alchemy. Okay, these are all the sciences of Egypt. He said he was learning not just some, but in all the wisdom of Egypt. Okay, and so as the leader of a people coming out of Egypt, he wanted to make sure that people were not carrying practices from Egypt that they had picked up and they were not particularly trained to execute skillfully. So it was a measure of caution, a measure of protection. That's number one. I can further prove this to you. All right. Here it says, Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10, there shall not be found among you any that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination. Let me stop right there. Again, there were systems of divination that were sanctioned by Jehovah. And I may go into that today, I may not. Such as the high priest had a system of divination in his breastplate called the Urim and the Thummim. All right, which was actually a breastplate of crystals. There were 12 different types of crystals in his breastplate. All right, that's called the ephod. The ephod would work so that you would go, you would inquire of the high priest, and he would ask the question before Jehovah, and different parts of the breastplate would light up. The crystals would illuminate, they would shine, they would vibrate. And depending upon the sequence of vibration and illumination, the priest could tell you what the answer to your inquiry was. That was one way, called the ephod. The other way they had was the Urim and the Thummim. The Urim and the Thummim were lots that were cast. Just to kind of give you an example here. From what we understand, it was probably a black piece, okay, like this right here, and a white piece, all right, or a couple of white pieces and a couple of black pieces. They would be in a little pouch like this, okay, that the high priest would have hidden behind his ephod. Okay, and so they would ask a question Okay, and there are a couple of methods I've read about in my research that they would have used. Either number one, they would have pulled the bag out and cast all of it out, okay, and divine that way, or normally it would be a yes or a no question they would ask. The priest would reach into his breastplate, okay, and he will pull out one of the pieces. All right. Of course, if it was the Urim, which means light, it would be yes. All right. If it was the Thurim, it would be a no. Okay. And you can actually do your research on that, called the Urim and the Thurim. Okay. But I want to talk a little bit more about the divination thing. So if we go to the book of Genesis, a verse you'll probably never hear preached on or taught on, in chapter uh um maybe it was, I want to say chapter 40. Yes, chapter 44. Chapter 44. This is the story of many of you who know your Bible stories know the story of Joseph and his brothers. This is that story, but this is probably a part of the story you've never heard taught on. Genesis chapter 44, and at verse 1, he commanded the steward of his house, this is Joseph talking, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. And my cup, the silver cup, is very clear that you get that. My cup, the silver cup, we'll get into that maybe later on, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money, and he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses. And when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, Up, follow after the men. And when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Verse 5. I want you to take note of this so you can go tell your boss. Verse 5, is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth? Ye have done evil in so doing. So here we see that Joseph has a cup, a silver cup, in which he divines in, probably through some form of hydromancy, as in scrying into the cup, or by tea leaf reading. All right, verse 6, and he overtook them, and he spake unto them these same words. And they said unto him, Wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servants should do according to this thing. Verse 8, behold, the money which we found in our sack's mouth we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of thy Lord's house silver or gold? Verse 9, whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, that we may be, and we also will be thy Lord's bondsmen. Verse 10, and he said, Now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. Verse 11, and they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched and began at the elders, and left at the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, who was the youngest. And then they rent their clothes, the other brothers, and laid in every man his ass, and returned to the city. Verse 14, and Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there. And when they fell before him on the ground, here it is, verse 15. This is Joseph's admission. This is Joseph, the man of God, the son of Jacob, the son of Abraham. Excuse me, the son of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Okay, so here's a patriarch. Everybody agrees that Joseph was a dreamer, that he was probably a prophet, etc. Okay, but here it is. We have an admission from Joseph himself I don't want to say the secret to his abilities, but one of the avenues in which he gains supernatural information. It says it right here, verse 15. And Joseph said unto them, what deed is this that ye have done? Wot ye not that such a man as I can surely or can certainly divine? Okay, so he admits here that he is a man of divination. Okay, that he is a man of divination. All right, so that's the second part I want to get to. The next part I want to, and again, my whole premise is that these practices are not evil and wicked in themselves. These practices are deemed evil and wicked in the hands of the unskilled and the unlearned and those who have not submitted their gift to the Almighty. Okay, reckless, renegade use of these spiritual activities and these spiritual abilities is an abomination, and it is forbidden by Jehovah. All right, so that's what I'm getting at. I'm not saying that these are by themselves wrong, and I think the person who read that text did not read it in the totality of Scripture, because you cannot substantiate those claims by reading the full Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Yes, if you pick and choose and kind of hoodwink and kidnap a verse from its context, you can come to any number of conclusions. Okay, but you have to take the Scriptures if you're going to be hermeneutic about it. You have to take the Scriptures, not just one here and one there, but read them in their context, number one, and compare that to other Scriptures. Okay? Now, I don't want to get too far into that, but so here we have Moses, okay, who we know was learned and who was skilled. He was trained in Egypt. All right. We look at Joseph, who was also trained in Egypt, a dreamer of dreams, a man of God, okay, who also used divination. Okay. This is people wonder why when you first read the exploits that Moses does in Egypt, as far as the plagues are concerned. I think like the first three or four of those miracles, the magicians of Egypt are actually able to match him line for line, and the reason for that is because they both learn from the same school. Okay, so the same tricks and the same abilities and the same powers or wonders that the magicians of Egypt were able to produce, Moses himself could produce those because he was in Egypt and was taught in Egypt and was trained in Egypt, and as Acts 7:22 showed us, he was learned in all the wisdom of Egypt. Okay, so now I want to get more to the mediumship part. Okay, because going back to our premise verse here in Deuteronomy 18, okay, it says here, and at verse 10, there shall not be found among you any that maketh his son or his daughters to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. All right. So there's a difference between necromancy and mediumship. All right. And I'm going to go to the one that the lady or the article talks about, something a lot of Bible thumpers want to throw out there as an objection, as a biblical objection to mediumship, which it is not if you read it in context, which is in the book of First Samuel. First Samuel, I think, is chapter 18. Um, no, excuse me, 28. I think it's 28. 28, I think. Yes, yes. Okay, and let's start here. This kind of really where, well, we can start here at verse 3. 1 Samuel chapter 28 and verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. And the Philistines gathered themselves together, and came and pitched in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. So this is talking about, of course, an age-old enemy of Israel, which are the Philistines, these giant races that have, because Samuel has died, now they want to kind of encroach and begin to make war again with the Israelites. The scriptures tell us that as long as Samuel lived, they would not come to the borders of Israel. But once he died, they want to begin to encroach. So now the king, Saul, who was also a mentee of Samuel, is now faced with an issue. Right, his mentor is dead, and now he has an old enemy returning back. The chickens have come home to roost, so to say. Okay. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid and his heart greatly trembled. Verse 6. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. All right, so I want to make that very, very clear. It says very clearly here that Saul did inquire of the Lord. Okay, Saul did inquire of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him. And then he gives you the three primary ways that God spoke to people in those days. He did not answer him by dreams. He did not answer him by the prophets, which again were the skilled and the ordained and the licensed and the credentialed spiritual practitioners. Okay. And he did not answer him by the Urim and the Thummim, which were the divination system or the oracle of the priest and the high priest. Okay, so in other words, he had gone through all of the official channels, as it were, to get an answer. His heart was right, his heart was pure. He went through all the appropriate protocols and still got no resolve. And so, in desperation, it says, verse 7, Then Saul said unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said unto him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. All right. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment. And he went, and two men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring him up, whom I shall name unto thee. Okay. I want you to highlight that. And bring him up, whom I shall name unto thee. Okay. Keep that in the back of your mind. Verse 9. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die. In other words, you're trying to trick me, right? Because Saul had disguised himself. Because beforehand he had put all these people out of all the unskilled, all the unaccounted for, all the unlicensed practitioners. He had put them out of the nation, right? He had made them close down shop and leave. Okay, and so verse 10, and Saul swore unto her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. In verse 11, then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. All right, point and case. This is one of the quintessential differences between mediumship and necromancy. I actually want to read an excerpt here from my good friend that talks about this. Um, okay. This is what I want to say. He says, conjuring up the dead is not a practice of a divine or priest or priestess. Neither is it a practice of genuine witches practicing their religion today. I don't necessarily agree with that. Um, it is commonly believed, making it possible to communicate with the deceased of their own free will, not our wills. The deceased can communicate with the living at any time they wish. That is mediumship. Okay? Mediumship is when the deceased initiates contact with the medium. Okay? When the deceased initiates contact with the medium. That is mediumship. Okay? Um, it says right here, okay. Um, the practice of necromancy does involve conjuring up the spirit to obtain information about a future event. This is pointed out often in 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 7 through 25. When King Saul consulted the woman of Endor, biblical scripture calls this woman a witch, but in reality she was a necromancer. Revealed in verse 11, when she asked King Saul, "Whom do you want me to conjure up?" Okay. This is a different type of communication with the dead. All right. All right. Human beings cannot communicate at will with the soul of the departed. God may permit a departed soul to appear to the living and even to disclose things unknown to them. In most cases, the deceased will communicate with their living family members through the dreams. Then he goes into other stuff here. But all of that, I don't agree with everything he said, but I will say this, that you have, when it deals with the dead, you have mediumship and you have necromancy. Mediumship is when the dead initiate communication with you. Okay? Necromancy is when you initiate contact with the dead. Okay? And one of the ways to easily discern the difference is there a person in particular? All right? You go to someone and they tell you that they can contact an individual person that is dead. That is necromancy. If they say, I can clear my space or whatever the case may be, and whoever needs to come forth can come forth and deliver you a message, that's mediumship. Okay? That's mediumship. So what we see is an example of necromancy. I myself practice necromancy. I am a necromancer. Okay. But what I'm getting at is that what she is underlying here, see, the Christians have misconstrued it, mediumship for necromancy. They're not the same. And because they kind of get glumped together, people say, oh, well, it says right here, don't do that or don't do this. But they don't understand the distinctions between the two, and that there is distinctions. And I will actually show you a biblical account of mediumship. Now, all right, I've got a few more minutes here. Okay. I want to go to Matthew chapter 17. We're going to see the greatest man that ever lived, Jesus himself, perform mediumship. Matthew chapter 17. So you ask them, you ask the lady on your job, whoever sent you the article, Well, what about when Jesus is speaking to the dead? What about that? Matthew chapter 17. Okay. After 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. They appeared. They weren't conjured up. They were not called forth. They were not contacted. Okay, they appear. They made their presence known. They showed up. Now, as we know, Moses and Elias, which is the Greek name for Elijah, are dead. Okay, they are most certainly dead. We can go back to Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 5. Deuteronomy 34 and 5. It says right here, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. Verse 6, and he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor, but no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. Okay, so yeah. So hundreds of years later, thousands of years later, actually, thousands of years later, Jesus comes on the scene in Matthew chapter 17 and speaks with a dead man. He speaks with a dead man. Okay, so yeah, so this is a picture of mediumship. Okay, so these are some verses you can, if you want to, engage her or engage your boss in a discussion. These are some verses you can say, well, hey, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And look at the things in context. So I'm going to wrap up by saying this. The practices outlined there were not abominable in and of themselves. They were abominable because they were going to be used by people who are unskilled, people who are not prophets. Okay? They had schools of prophets. They had schools of prophets. All right. And I will prove this to you. I just showed it to you how, one tells you that they should not be doing mediumship per se, and Jesus is now working mediumship in Matthew chapter 17. Okay. They want to say to you, don't, look at the times and astrology. Well, here we see Moses in Acts chapter 7, verse 22, that Moses knows all the wisdom of Egypt. Okay, we looked at how it talks about don't use divination, and yet again, Genesis 44, Joseph is divining. So what's the difference between these people? Moses, Joseph, Jesus. These people were skilled. They were prophets. Okay, so the reason why, as you say, Candy, your gift came forth if you were born again is because God had ordained that in you. Okay, these are for naturally gifted people who've gone through the process of being trained and cultivated. All right. Jesus and Moses went to the exact same mystery school in Egypt. Okay, Joseph as well. Daniel didn't go to Egypt. Daniel went to Assyria, Babylon. Now I'll get to that. It says right here, don't seek out a witch or what have you, or a magician. Let me go back here. um, Deuteronomy 18. Okay, and it says here, there shall not be found among you any that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that use of divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. Okay, so wizard, witch, enchanter, charmer, these magicians. Okay, but yet we see here in Daniel chapter 4. All right. Nebuchadnezzar the king, as we know, Daniel was the guy who was in the lion's den and the lions didn't bother him. They didn't eat him alive. Daniel chapter 4 says, Nebuchadnezzar the king unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. Let's see. Yeah. I thought it good to show. Now, this again is Daniel's address. Excuse me, this is Nebuchadnezzar's address to the people. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house, and flourished in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed, and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men, all the magicians, the magi of Babylon before me, that I might make known, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar. So they called him his Babylonian name. His Hebrew name was Daniel. His Babylonian name was Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom the Spirit of the Holy God. You talk about being born again, filled with the Spirit of God. So was Daniel. In whom is the Spirit of the Holy gods, and before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians. That's what it says right there. In other words, O Daniel, he wasn't just a magician, he was the master of magicians. That means he was really, really skilled to hold that office. That means that he was, as a prophet, was sitting among the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, the wizards, and he was preeminent amongst them. He was the best of he was an elite magician. He was a master of the magicians. Because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. That's what causes a person to be a master magician. The spirit of the most high God is in them. And that no secret troubleth thee. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. So these are things that we need to reason with. You know, we've looked at 1 Samuel chapter 28. We've looked at Deuteronomy 18. We've looked at Genesis chapter 44. We've looked at Acts 7 and 22. We've looked at Matthew 17 verses 1 through 3. We've looked at Daniel chapter 1 through Daniel chapter 4 verses 1 through 9. All of these verses on the surface compared to Deuteronomy 18 are like, well, what is going on here? They don't make sense unless you believe the Bible is contradicting itself, which I don't. And most biblical people who follow the Bible don't believe the Bible contradicts themselves. Your Christian friend, I'm sure, would agree that the Bible does not contradict itself. So the only other way that this makes sense is if the edict from Jehovah is applying to a specific group of people, which are those who are unlearned, unskilled, untrained, people who are not gifted in these arts. those that are those people who show affinity for certain spiritual gift and supernatural phenomenon, they were sent off to what they call the schools of the prophets, where they will be taught and trained. All right. In the time of David, there were about 4 schools of prophets: at Gilgal, at Jericho, at Jordan, and at Ramah. Okay. By the time of Josiah the prophet, the 8-year-old king of the Bible, Huldah, a prophetess and also a seamstress, said she was at a college of the prophets. So they had universities, just like we have today. Kepler University, the college for astrologers, they had colleges, institutions, universities, schools, campuses to bring the mystics in and to train them in these arts. Okay, that's the difference between a drug dealer and a pharmacist. That's what Deuteronomy 18 is all about. Okay, so I hope I was able to really give you some content. I hope I was able to give you some different ways of looking at this. I was able to give you some perspective. If you have any other questions about this kind of stuff, let me know. Like I said, I'm a ordained minister, did professional ministry, public ministry rather, for 8 years. I was a professional theomancer for that period of time. So this was my life for a very long period of my existence. So I love the scriptures. I hope this really helped clear up a lot of misinformation. I hope those of you who may have heard these verses in bad light now have some context for them, and hopefully you have some some references to have constructive dialogue and engaging conversation. So that being said, thank you guys, and keep up the good work you have here, and let's all be intuitive together. As they just accepted me. Man, you late. You gotta go catch the whole thing. You gotta go catch the whole thing. I don't know how to. I'm gonna make sure that um, I guess stop streaming. I guess. Um, uh, um, There's my phone. Where's my phone? Uh, no, but seriously, like, where is my? It must be in the kitchen somewhere. Okay, so I I need a way I can tell that I'm off the air. So uh, am I frozen here? I'm hoping everything works out. Oh, well, I guess so. Well, I guess I can. Right here.